Hi, my name is Morgan, but today you can call me Captain Morgan, and I am a neuroscientist. Welcome to spooky season on this channel, where every week I've been dressing up as a different thing and talking about different spooky subjects in neuroscience. You can check out last week's video where I talked about ghosts, and then the week before that we did scary movies. So we've been having a lot of fun with it. Today, though, we're talking about something that I really is closely associated with neuroscientists, but I didn't really think there was anything to it. Zombies. Obviously, you can draw the comparisons there. Neuroscientists love brains. Zombies love brains. So we get compared to zombies actually quite a bit, especially whenever we're in lab and being oh, I'm collecting a brain today. Yes, but we don't eat them, and I think that's an important difference. But today we're going to be talking about zombies. And this whole video was honestly inspired by a Google search. I just searched for creepy neuroscience topics, and I found this book written by two guys. I cannot pronounce either of their names, but I'll put their names up here. And the name of the book is Do Zombies Dream of Undead Sheep? And the whole idea of the book is it's looking at the neuroscience behind zombies, and it's meant to be written in a way where the public can understand it. And so you don't need a neuroscience degree to understand what's going on. And it just uses the allegory of zombies to talk about mental health and talk about different things that could go wrong in the brain. I'm going to read the book at some point because it sounds like an awesome book. It's only $10 on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. But I don't have time to read it right now. So I looked up a few different interviews with these people and found some of the things that they've diagnosed zombies with, and I just wanted to talk about them. But before I get started with all of the things that are going on with zombies, I'd like to put in just a little disclaimer, which is some of these things are going to be mental illnesses, and some of them would also be classified as disabilities. And I don't want to be spreading any sort of stigma around mental illness and disabilities. So I just want to say all of this is fake in context of a zombie. So everything that I say is about a not real thing and not really living human being. So don't take any of this to mean more than it does, and don't go around making fun of people with mental illnesses. If you have a mental illness, don't feel bad. It's not your fault. You didn't go out and get bitten by someone and get it. So yeah, I just want to say mental illness is not a joke, and also disabilities are not a joke. This is all in the context of zombies, and zombies are a joke. So I just want to be very clear from the beginning. I fully support people with mental illnesses and disabilities. So first, I thought we'd do a little intro to the world of zombies, because I really didn't know where they came from. I honestly thought that they were created by scary movies, so it was really interesting to see where they came from, because I think maybe not a lot of people know about this. But we actually, the white people actually stole them from Haitians, which fits with every single other thing that white people have done. So the word for zombie originated from Haiti, and from a word that I'm not going to try to pronounce for fear of maybe offending people, but I'll put it here. And then this word ended up becoming the word zombie, and it means spirit of a dead person. In the practice of voodoo, a priest has the ability to sort of take the soul of a troubled individual or a threatening individual, and they can take the soul and momentarily kill the person, and the person's soul goes to whatever place that people who believe in voodoo believe in. I'm not super familiar with that religion. But so the spirit goes to this other place, and then you're left with a body, which the priest then resurrects, and the body becomes a zombie and is sort of enslaved to this priest and just sort of goes around doing whatever the priest asks it to. What I think is really interesting about this is that it's it sounds like myth, like religion, not something that's real, not something that's rooted in reality and things that we can see, feel, touch, all of those things. But it's actually just neuroscience. It's all pharmacological, which means that pharmacological, drugs, neuro, brain, drugs for the brain. So to make these zombies, the priest uses a chemical that's commonly found in pufferfish called tetrodotoxin, which will temporarily paralyze an individual and induce a death-like state, a state that could be mistaken for a death but isn't. If you take too much of this chemical, you will die, but if you use the amount that these priests use, it just induces this death-like state. They sort of go into I don't know what to call it other than like it appears like they're dead, but they're not. They're still alive. And so the priest induces this, and then once the person begins to awake from it, because the chemical wears off eventually, the person starts to wake up. The priest then resurrects them. While the priest is resurrecting them, the priest gives them a plant called datura. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'll put all the hard words here. So the plant called datura, which contains the chemicals scopolamine and hyoscyamine. Both of these chemicals are powerful hallucinogens that also make a patient, or in this case, a practicer of voodoo, more compliant. And so you could really, someone who's on these chemicals, you could really just sort of suggest anything and they'll sort of, in a trance-like state, do it. So they appear to be zombies. So the Haitian voodoo priests were making these zombies, and then along comes the white man. So, not a joking matter, slavery happened, which was obviously very bad, and Haitian people were stolen from their country and brought to America to be slaves. And whenever the slave owners heard of this zombie thing happening, they actually took it and started using it as a threat for their slaves, because oftentimes slaves would end up committing suicide because of their tragic, awful, horrible conditions, and the slave owners needed to figure out a way to prevent that from happening in their brain. And so what they decided to do was to talk about creating these zombies and say, like, hey, you can't kill yourself, because if you do that, I'll just make you a zombie slave, and then I'll still have you here. And so that was sort of something worse than death for these enslaved people. And then over time, of course, like, slavery ended, depending on who you ask. And then we reached modern times where we turn zombies into movies. So what condition do we now believe that zombies are suffering from? The authors of this book have deemed the condition of being a zombie consciousness deficit hypoactivity disorder. And they say that they use this sort of like mental illness diagnoses where you don't have to have all of these things wrong with you, but if you have like X number of these things wrong with you, then probably you're a zombie. The authors of this book also make a point to say something that I think we don't acknowledge often enough, that a lot of times we're able to diagnose things and figure out how different parts of the brain work from things going wrong with it. So in this case, the thing going wrong with it is that you're a zombie. But there's been a lot of cases in the past where patients have gotten into accidents where they've damaged a part of their brain, they've had cancerous spots in a part of their brain, they've had like a bullet through a part of their brain. Different things helped us figure out what parts of the brain did, because you can't really fully understand what it does until it stops working, and then you see what doesn't happen anymore. So the first thing that everyone notices whenever there's a zombie, or the like one thing that's always included in every zombie movie, is that like hunger for human flesh. They just really, really want to eat a human. I don't know why, other than it's scary. That's not a part of the voodoo version of a zombie, but that is what we Americans have decided zombies want, is to eat us. But what's also like interesting about a zombie is that they don't just like, oh, I'm hungry for a human, and then they eat one human and then they're like, oh, I'm full until dinner time. Like, they just continually want to eat humans. So if someone is continually hungry or thirsty constantly, it's not stopping, no matter how much they eat or they drink, they're still hungry and thirsty, they probably have something wrong with their hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain that controls satiety, which is like being full, being satiated, being happy with where you're at, food and water wise. They also have maybe the worst attention span of all time, and also somehow the best focus, because they focus on like the one person in the room and they go after that one person, and they're very focused no matter what's happening around them. But also, if you like threw a rock, they would like chase the rock. So they're not the brightest, and they also like are hyper-focused and somehow also easily distracted. So what is that? That's actually a thing called balance syndrome. Real life people who suffer from balance syndrome can really only focus on one thing at a time. And so it took scientists a really long time to diagnose this, because there's several disorders that make you not be able to recognize things. There's a couple of them where, like, say you could see an object, but you wouldn't be able to identify what that object is. Or there's somewhere, like, you know what the object is, but you can't communicate what the object is. Or there's somewhere you just totally have no clue what it is. And so what scientists will do, they'll hold up an object and then ask you to identify it. But people suffering from balance could identify two objects separately. Like, if you held up one object and said, what's this? And then a different object said, what's this? They would be able to know what it is. But if they had two objects right next to each other, the subject would only be able to identify one object. And if they were standing totally across the room with this one object and said, hey, come towards this object, come towards this object in this direction, but focus on this, the patient, like, if there was like a chair in their way, they would run into the chair. Even though that's something super obvious and easy to see, they wouldn't see it. They would only see that one object. So this is like zombies see the one person that they're chasing after, but not like the giant group of zombie hunters that is setting the trap for them that they're running into. Balance syndrome is very, very rare, but it happens usually due to damage in the parietal lobe. And the parietal lobe is the center of visual movement control. So if you see a thing that is moving, or you are trying to move towards a thing that is moving, that's controlled by your parietal lobe. The authors of this book also point out that in this case, if zombies were real, it would be better to stop and hide than to run, because they're less likely to focus on you if you're sitting still. Another really well-known characteristic of zombies is that zombie walk. You know, that walk. And these scientists say that this walk is due to a thing called spinocerebral ataxia, which ataxia is just a difficulty moving a part of the body. So you could have many different ataxias, and it just means like you either can't or you are struggling to move a specific body part. Spinocerebellar ataxia specifically is due to damage to the cerebellum, which the cerebellum is this bit at the back of the brain, and it controls a lot of different really basic bodily functions like movement. It can also lead to slurred speech, so how zombies have a really difficult time communicating and sometimes could just like barely get out the word brains before like eating you. That's part of the cerebellar ataxia. People with spinocerebral ataxia also have difficulties balancing, which also might explain a little bit of that walk. Another really interesting thing that these authors did was that they talked to some movie writers and movie directors and asked them like why zombies do certain things in their movies, because they're not neuroscientists. I doubt they were like diagnosing zombies on set. But they asked one movie director why his zombies move so stiffly, and the movie director just like looked at them and was like, because they're dead. Like, dead things would probably move really stiffly. Which I think is interesting because that's not how rigor mortis works. So in case you're not familiar with it, rigor mortis is the thing that happens to you after you die. The body becomes very stiff. And that's actually a really interesting concept in neuroscience, or in physiology. But I might make a video on it at some point now that I'm thinking about it, because it's so cool how it works. But also, like, you're dead, so like less cool, but it's pretty nifty. But anyways, whenever you die, you get like very stiff, all of your muscles tighten up, and you're just very stiff. But that does wear off eventually. I'm not sure how long it takes for it to wear off in humans, but you're not like stiff in a coffin forever. So zombies wouldn't actually be that stiff. They'd actually be pretty loose depending on how long it's been since they died. But then there's the concept of how decomposed are they? Do they have the muscles to move still? So there's a lot of different aspects that would go into a zombie, like, walking. Zombies also have this inability to recognize people from their past life. If you've ever seen a zombie movie where, like, someone gets bitten and then they turn, and then all of a sudden they turn on, like, their whole group, even though they were best friends with people, like, you would think that they would remember their friends at least, like the people who were there with them while they were turning. I think that makes sense. So why don't they recognize people? There's actually a thing called prosopagnosia, which I don't think that I said correctly, but it's commonly referred to as face blindness. And people suffering from prosopagnosia can't recognize faces, even of their loved ones, of people that they've seen every single day. They can't recognize their face. And this is usually due to damage from the fusiform gyrus, which is like way deep inside of the brain. I'll put a picture up here. And the fusiform gyrus is just one bump in the brain that controls our ability to see faces and to recognize faces. It also has to do with the ability to remember faces. So if you have damage to that area, you're not going to remember a face. And damage to this area could be caused by several things. Usually it's because of a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, and sometimes a neurodegenerative disease. Going back to the moving, if you've ever seen more than one zombie movie, you'll know that sometimes zombies are really fast and like can run at incredible speeds. And sometimes they're like walk at like a normal human pace, and sometimes they're so slow that your protagonist should just be able to run away from them, but they never are. So what causes this variability in zombies? And the people who wrote this book actually came up with one theory called the time to resurrection hypothesis. If you'll notice in these movies, oftentimes the fast zombies are ones that turn right away, like you get bitten and then almost immediately you're a zombie. Versus most movies with very slow zombies, it's zombies that have died and been dead for a little while and then come to life. So the theory is something like whenever your brain is deprived of oxygen for too long, you start to lose different bodily functions. So in this case, zombies that turn immediately have not lost their bodily functions because their brain wasn't deprived of oxygen. So they're still able to move at like a fast rate. But zombies who died, their brain's been deprived of oxygen for who knows how long. And so, yeah, they've lost some control of their motor movements. That makes sense. Zombies don't really seem to remember much. They seem to forget most of their past life. And they also seem to not really be, like, trainable. Like, there's no way that you could, like, work out a deal with the zombie that they wouldn't kill you, because they might just wake up the next morning and kill you. So this could be due to damage to the hippocampus, which if you damage your hippocampus, it causes retrograde amnesia, which doesn't mean like, oh, I forgot everything that's happened to me up to this point, but then now I can make new memories. It's the opposite. You can't form new memories anymore. The most famous case of this was with a patient called HM. I don't know if he's still alive. I know that this is a pretty old case, so if he is, he'd be really old. But this patient would wake up every day to the doctor that's been treating him for years, and never once has he recognized the doctor. He can't form these new memories, and he can't recognize his nurses, but he does recognize like his family members because he knew them before. But if his family members like tell him something, he'll forget that. So he knows everything that happened to him up until his accident, and then every day from then on has been a new day, and he doesn't remember anything that happened. I do plan on doing a video on HM at some point because it's a fascinating case and a fascinating disorder, I guess you would call it. It's really interesting. Lastly, with zombies, they can't tell you what's happening to them. They're not good at verbal expression. And this could be due to damage in several areas because language is really processed by a lot of different parts of your brain. But two main parts that process language are Broca's and Wernicke's areas. And damage to either Broca or Wernicke's areas does different things, but it really inhibits your ability to communicate with others. And the theory behind the zombies' inability to communicate is that they have a flawed or acute fasciculus, which is the part of the brain that connects Broca's and Wernicke's areas. So people with damage to Broca's areas have issues speaking. So you can talk to them and they will understand it, but they will have problems giving it back to you and speaking back to you about different things. And people with damage to Wernicke's areas have issues understanding what you're saying. So they can tell you things, but they can't really process the words that you say to them. So in this case, in zombies, this manifests in the grunts trying to communicate with you and then them not understanding you begging for your life. So that is the official neuroscientist diagnosis of a zombie. Never thought I would say those words. Like I said, I'll leave a link to the guy's book down in the description because it's fascinating that they did this. It's two neuroscientists. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's two neuroscientists who just enjoy zombie movies, and so they started diagnosing zombies. So that's pretty cool. I'll also leave the link to all of my sources in the description so you can check out more about zombies, I guess. You can follow me on all of my social medias. I'll list them here. And you can email me at askaneuroresearcher@gmail.com, and I will answer whatever questions you might have. You can ask me anything, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. So with that, thank you for watching, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye.